Today on Central Illinois on the Record, when is deadly force appropriate? We hear from the state's attorney who puts police under review when they pull the trigger. Plus, the Supreme Court rejects a case over limits on guns, what it means for Illinois. And understanding radicalization, how inflammatory language can impact those on the fringe.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. 166 days and counting since Illinois has been without a budget. But progress is being made. A bill that will free up billions of dollars for local governments was signed by the governor Monday. It will give critical funding for low-income families to help pay their electric bills, salt for wintry roads, and motor fuel tax money to local governments. Adult education programs across the state will remain open. The bill will also help keep domestic violence shelters open and fund 911 call centers. Both Democrats and Republicans say this was a step in the right direction.
If the leaders continue to meet and continue to find some common ground, even on difficult issues. So while, it's a small step, I do think it's a step in the right direction today.
I mean, we've got a lot of work to do here, but that shows that, we can bring the speaker to the table as long as people are working together.
Both the House and the Senate will not return to their chambers until after the new year. Local lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are happy with the bill's passage. Recently elected Republican State Senator Chuck Weaver says this is one more step, but an important step towards achieving a balanced budget. Democratic State Senator Dave Kaler says, "I'm glad a compromise could be agreed to that authorizes spending for winter road maintenance, 911 emergency services, home heating bill assistance, and other essential programs." Illinois lottery winners will soon be paid. The state's lottery is getting $1 billion to pay prizes. Since July, many lotto winners haven't been paid thanks to the budget impasse. A lottery spokesman says winners could be paid as soon as next week. However, it depends on the order in which those claims are filed. The state Senate passes a bill letting agencies pay for rent and electricity, but some lawmakers say that's the least they could do. The last 6 months have been tough on departments for even the most basic expenses, leaving some workers using buckets instead of toilets this past month.
We have 138 driver services facilities throughout the state. That's 138 different landlords. And as you know, without a budget, we're unable to pay them.
The Secretary of State's office will receive $10 million to help pay those landlords. The office has been looking for money to keep its facilities open and protect its confidential information. The office says the state has forced it into uncomfortable situations.
Work with landlords in a way we don't like working with, which is basically saying you're going to get paid eventually, but right now we don't have the means to do that without a budget.
In the Capitol, the pleas from state agencies short on everything from ink to toilet paper come in nonstop.
And I hear this on a daily basis about not being able to acquire paper, toilet paper, the utility issue.
Monday's bill will send $84 million to help agencies pay for everything from rent to electricity. But it doesn't solve the biggest problem, how to balance it all in the end.
We should be here. Everybody else has to show up for work.
And the House and Senate are not expected back until the new year.
It's a collective slap in the face that the governor, the 4 legislative leaders, and even rank-and-file members aren't here at least 5 days a week.
That was Matt Porter reporting. One important note, we are now only 2.5 months from when the governor is supposed to lay out his budget plan for 2017. Students are still fighting the General Assembly for funding. There are several bills in the State House, but there hasn't been movement since early November. The delay is causing the state, schools, and students to worry. Campuses are dipping into their reserves to loan funding to students since there's no money for MAP grants. However, lawmakers and students fear this lack of money will cause some students to drop out or, in some cases, attend school out of state.
As I said, my parents aren't able to help me pay loans and stuff like that, so I'd have to take a hard look and think, is this, am I going to be able to do this or am I not? And if not, I would have to move to maybe an out-of-state school or something like that.
Senator Scott Bennett says the latest bill funds nearly $365 million. That's the same amount the governor was asking for, which is $9 million less than the last fiscal year. Underage alcohol compliance checks more than tripled this year across the state, but those stings are taking a back seat without a state budget. Law enforcement and stores say they're enforcing the law, especially with the new year just ahead. Without money, though, the state doesn't have the manpower to send teenagers to try and buy alcohol. The Illinois Church Action on Alcohol and Addiction program lobbies across the state to put an end to underage drinking, and its fight is getting harder.
These businesses, unless they know someone is checking on them, it's going to be easy for young people to slip through the cracks.
It's been 6 months since the state has conducted any underage alcohol stings. Operations will resume once a budget is passed. The commission has conducted some alternative compliance inspections by partnering with local law enforcement. Many people depend on the Salvation Army during the holiday season, but without money from the state, the agency is asking for help. As our Eugene Daniel explains, now in the heart of the holidays, one of the area's most reliable agencies says changes may be necessary if the money doesn't start to roll in.
Like many social service agencies, Salvation Army feels the crunch of the budget crisis. Unfortunately, the state doesn't look like it will be in the giving mood this Christmas.
We are about $75,000 in arrears from the state, and they've pretty much told us we probably won't be getting that.
A lot of that money helps its children's services. Salvation Army serves more than 10,000 people, including shelter and meals for people in need. But the loss is beginning to show.
We've already seen a pinch in our food pantry, for instance, where we're shut it down one day a week.
Since the state won't come through with its end of the bargain, the agency is looking to the community to fill the gap. The Greater Peoria chapter is asking for roughly $300,000 more in this year's kettle campaign.
So this year we're not calling it a goal, we're calling it a need amount. And that number is $1,920,000, and that's because that's truly what we need to be able to maintain our current level of services.
The same is true for Captain Rick Ray in the Pekin chapter, which raised its goal to $150,000. And if it doesn't raise the money,
could be cuts. There could be stuff but that's the last resort.
Ray is confident the community will come through like it always has. In 1990, donations paid for this 36-person transitional housing unit. Today, he hopes fundraising efforts pick up.
We have to average around, I did some crunching that, about $3,000 a day. We've been averaging about $1,500 a day. So you can see the math that we're a little behind.
So far, Salvation Army says it has not had to dig into its reserves like other agencies, but at some point, it may need to make changes.
We're going to have to take a hard look at where we're at the end of January with this campaign, and if we don't make that need amount, then we're really going to have to look at the numbers and figure out, okay, do we have to cut back on programs? Do we have to minimize some of the help we're able to do?
If you'd like to help but are unable to donate money, Ray says your time is just as valuable. The Salvation Army is looking for volunteers to man kettles at several location stations. The campaign ends in just a few weeks. Still ahead, when police pull the trigger, the officer is under review. We talked to a state's attorney about his investigation. But up next, understanding radicals, what it means when campaign rhetoric is called dangerous. All right, welcome back. Joining me now, Dr. Yusuf Sarfati from Illinois State University. And today we're talking about radicalization and political rhetoric. First, thank you for joining me again.
Glad to be here.
All right, so, we've heard a lot in the past week, both from presidential candidate Donald Trump and from President Obama when it comes to how the Muslim population is handled, how refugees are handled, how immigrants are handled. And Donald Trump says he wants to prevent all Muslims from coming to the United States because he's, I guess, worried that everybody is potentially a terrorist. When somebody says something like that, how does that, when people say that's dangerous rhetoric, what do they really mean when they say that?
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up. It is very important, and I think it has been very dangerous, as you say, and as many people are picking on that. What people mean is when we are talking about issues like terrorism, issues like attacks that happened in Paris, in San Bernardino, right? There's an important component of it that people talk about security, how to prevent terrorism, how to work on counterterrorism. But once you take those sorts of attacks and play on people's fear and project those types of attacks on a group of people and say all the Muslims are potential terrorists, then it has significant impact on the people, right, on the Muslims, American Muslims who are impacted by that. I mean, we are already seeing the effect of that. The hate crimes against Muslims have been up for several years, and in the last couple of days, especially after the San Bernardino attack and after the Paris attacks, we are hearing from the Muslim community leaders that there are death threats against them, that certain mosques have been vandalized, right? So people's lives have been shrinking because they are seen by the outer society as potential terrorist or security threats. And yeah.
And we've heard that we've heard the president say, and others in the Republican Party say, that we need to work together with the Muslim population. Mm-hmm. But when you have something like that Donald Trump says, that's going to alienate those people. Mm-hmm. And while they obviously want to have a good relationship, it's going to make it difficult. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I mean, that's the point. It's very important to understand that Muslim Americans have been working with the FBI or with other kind of state agencies to prevent terrorism. I mean, they have been 40% of the tips that have come to FBI came from the Muslims, which have really prevented many of the attacks. That is very important to understand. And it's also very important to understand that many of the potential recruits, right, and we are here talking about really a fraction of the general Muslim population here. They become potential recruits by being isolated from their communities, because American Muslims are generally very well integrated into the American society. I mean, there are researches. Pew Research Center has conducted some research that shows that many of them are middle class, many of them are socially mobile in terms of degrees. They have as much advanced degrees as the other non-Muslim Americans. And this is quite different from the European societies, where you see many of the Muslim youth being marginalized, right? So we would like to keep this, right? But if you are employing the rhetoric that Donald Trump and some of the other Republican candidates are employing, you are really pushing people and alienating them more rather than integrating them.
All right, I want to pick up on that in just a minute when we come back. Dr. Yusuf Sarfati from Illinois State University. We'll be right back.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
All right, welcome back. Dr. Yusuf Sarfati is here from Illinois State University, and we're talking about radicalization. And before the break, we started talking about isolation and integration into the communities. And there's kind of a divide right now in the campaign for president about how to include everyone, because there's a lot of talk of division. Even Senator Rand Paul has talked about stopping the flow of immigrants or refugees from several countries in the Middle East. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I mean, this is really going to shape the campaign, at least for some time, it seems.
Right, it's true. And I mean, the remarks that Trump made are not isolated remarks. And from several Republican candidates, we have heard similar thing from Ben Carson, who said that he wants to stop Middle Eastern immigrants altogether, or we have seen like certain religious tests should be applied to Syrian refugees. Many of the governors have claimed that they do not want to resettle many of the Syrian refugees. Definitely using certain rhetoric around, like anti-Muslim rhetoric, will be a part of the campaign. It is already a big part of the campaign. But I think President Obama said something very important, right? What we can do and what we cannot do when we are talking about fighting ISIS, right? And one of the things is really employing this type of divisive rhetoric, which really is very much alienating for a greater population.
Well, and something else, and maybe that we can try to get this briefly, but people say that kind of rhetoric that Donald Trump is saying plays right into the hands of ISIS. For people who don't understand what that means, what does that mean?
Right. I mean, ISIS basically has a very black and white worldview, very ideological, apocalyptic, and they say that they are representing Islam, they are representing Muslims, and they are casting all the Muslims worldwide as victims, and they are fighting the West and America. And if you really start to expose your own Muslim citizens as potential threats and really discriminate against them, then you are telling to ISIS, yes, we are the enemy, and you are also kind of framing the battle as if it's a battle against Islam by America. And this is exactly what we need not try to do. We should prevent that from happening, and because of that, what we need to do is really to recruit the Muslim communities who are already part of the effort of the White House and other kind of state agencies in this kind of battle.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining the program again this week. This is Dr. Yusuf Sarfati from Illinois State University. Still ahead, putting police under the microscope, how prosecutors review the use of force. But first, medical marijuana patients and the workplace, what employers need to know about the state's pilot program. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to medical marijuana use, especially in the workplace. Heartland Community College hosted a class for employers last week to clear up discrepancies between state and federal law. Our Rachel Kay was there and has more on how businesses can handle the pilot program.
The answer to that is no, that employers, Illinois employers, do not have to allow medical marijuana in the workplace.
It sounds like a simple response. Chris Wildrick works with Falcon Safety Group, a consulting company that specializes in safety and human resources.
Depending on the type of work that you do, you might take a zero tolerance stand, or you might be able to take a little more compassionate stand.
But it depends in large part on the type of work you do. Norm Ralph with Waugh Foods came to class today to learn about medical marijuana use when it comes to commercial drivers.
The responsibility of putting drivers out there on big rigs driving down the highway, in the warehouse where other people are working, that we're safe.
Wildrick explains that CDL drivers cannot use marijuana, even medically, under Department of Transportation regulations. But Ralph was surprised to learn that not all types of cannabis are psychoactive.
That was very interesting that some of it affects from the head down and some of it affects above our shoulders down and above the shoulders.
It's the THC that has psychoactive effects. A lot of medical marijuana is low in THC and high in cannabidiol, or CBD. The CBD might not show up in a drug test, and based on HIPAA, someone using medical marijuana doesn't have to tell the company.
It's not the employer's place to know what they're medicating with and how they're medicating.
Of course, if a patient does fail a drug test, any action depends on the company's policy.
Then they have a tough decision to make. Do they choose to keep their employment, or do they choose to separate from their employer so that they can use medical cannabis?
Wildrick says it's important for businesses to clearly define drug policies, particularly as they relate to medical marijuana. A medical marijuana company is launching a study to create a product that better caters to a patient's needs. Revolution Cannabis Analytics, part of Revolution Enterprises, is partnering with 4 dispensaries to survey medical marijuana users about their experiences with their medicine. The goal is to create strains of marijuana that target specific conditions. Because marijuana is a Schedule I drug, the federal government restricts research, so testing products and specific ailments is nearly impossible in the U.S. The surveys are being collected through January 8th in Mundelein, Canton, Addison, and Quincy. Still ahead, the Supreme Court says no to a case that puts limits on the Second Amendment. What an expert says about why the court may eventually have to take up a similar case. But up next, officers and the use of force. What happens when police pull the trigger and how it's reviewed.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Disturbing video released again last week, calling into question the actions of Chicago police officers. A man was tased in a jail cell and later died. It comes after video was released of 2 other shootings in the city, including one that shows a teenager being shot more than a dozen times. The patterns and practices of the CPD are now under investigation by the Department of Justice. The release of these videos and others across the country have people asking whether officers are going too far. It's a difficult question, and as our Hannah Hilliard explains, it's one that's left to a prosecutor to decide.
In his 30 years on the job, State's Attorney Stuart Umholtz has reviewed 5 cases of police using deadly force in Tazewell County.
Every police officer knows that if they unholster their weapon and they discharge it, they're going to be reviewed extensively.
And they are. Umholtz says he looks at all the facts.
If there was ever going to be a criticism, it would be that they waited too long to make that determination.
That includes dash cam footage and videos, just like those released in Chicago. But he looks at it a little differently than you might.
We don't do instant replays. We don't look at tapes the way they do in a football game and slow it down and look at it. We have to look at it in real time.
Because of how closely police officers and state's attorneys work together, some question whether prosecutors can be objective.
We have a very, I guess you would say, kind of a tough relationship.
Tough because prosecutors ask a lot of police officers.
Sometimes, they call you and say, well, what were you thinking here?
We are always the ones reviewing, critiquing. We're the ones that tell the police that they have to do it this way, that they've done something that they could have done better.
Both Umholtz and Pekin Police Detective Mike Eaton says it's a strictly professional relationship.
While we have that good relationship with them, it is something that while we do our job, they also do theirs.
As prosecutors in Ferguson, Baltimore, and Chicago continue to decide whether to press charges against officers,
I don't think we are in a totally different world than Cook County. It's a bit different than Cook County, but I've never met a police officer that wanted to shoot somebody.
Umholtz releases opinions each time an officer uses deadly force and includes all the facts gathered and what led him to his conclusion. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can stay in touch with us using social media. Connect with WMBD and me on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.